pregnant wife crawled to the hospital alone. The millionaire was on a yacht with his mistress. A drenched phone buzzing on the kitchen table, a half-packed hospital bag kicked into a corner, and a pregnant woman on her hands and knees, gasping for air, struggling to reach the door. Across the city skyline, her husband, millionaire mogul Andrew Moretti, raises a glass of champagne aboard a luxurious yacht, a smug smile dancing across his lips. Oblivious to his wife's agony, he stands surrounded by enablers and, most notably, his alluring mistress. How did a once blissful marriage unravel into this harrowing scene? Buckle up for a roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and fierce resilience that will leave you questioning every loyalty and vow. Michelle Patterson felt tears pooling in the corners of her eyes as she stared across the dinner table. It was their second wedding anniversary, and the private rooftop of the famed Pierre Hotel in Manhattan glowed with fairy lights and candles. Andrew Moretti, her husband, had just finished a phone call that lasted no more than 30 seconds, but the tension it left behind stretched on for minutes. The night was supposed to be perfect. Andrew had insisted on paying top dollar for an intimate, high-end chef's tasting menu. Michelle wore her favorite burgundy gown, carefully selecting every piece of jewelry to show just how deeply she cared for the celebration. But Andrew seemed distant. Yes, he was dressed to the nines, exuding confidence in his tailored tuxedo. Yes, he smiled and reached for her hand across the table. But behind that polite gesture lurked a certain restlessness she couldn't quite name. Still, she pushed away the unease. When Andrew proposed a toast, Michelle's heart fluttered. He raised his champagne flute, although they both knew Michelle was nearly 2 months pregnant by then, and she could only sip sparkling water and began to speak in a soft but poised voice. He recounted how they met at a business convention in Denver, how he had been instantly drawn to her warmth and sincerity. He declared that the future was bright. In that moment, Michelle allowed herself to believe him. At the end of the toast, Andrew dug into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a stunning necklace, a rose gold chain with a delicately carved heart-shaped pendant, studded with tiny diamonds. Michelle gasped, overwhelmed with both awe and an unshakable hint of anxiety. Had he gifted her this lavish piece to apologize for something she didn't yet know? She pushed the thought away. She let the romantic evening sink into her heart. Andrew enveloped her hand in his. Their gazes locked, and for a fleeting moment, the world felt as if it was theirs to conquer. Michelle whispered a heartfelt thank you. Little did she know how soon that cherished memory would warp into something twisted, a veneer of happiness, hiding secrets that would tear her life apart. Michelle's background could not be more different from Andrew's. Raised in a cozy suburb of Boston, Michelle was nurtured by 2 loving parents, her father a hard-working electrician, her mother a devoted elementary school teacher. She spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter, her nights studying under a single reading lamp in the small bedroom she shared with a younger sister, Amy. She grew up believing in the power of genuine connection, kindness, and dreams built from the ground up. It was that unwavering faith that carried her to a scholarship at Boston College, where she studied communications. Upon graduation, Michelle landed a junior position in a PR agency in Denver. She excelled quickly, forging strong relationships with clients and impressing her bosses with her sincerity and sharp mind. Andrew, by contrast, was born into a world of expensive summer camps and luxury ski trips. His father, Richard Moretti, owned a lucrative chain of auto dealerships across New England. Money flowed easily in the Moretti household. Ambition was an inheritance. Andrew's mother, Elizabeth Moretti, managed various charity foundations, though rumors often whispered that her philanthropic endeavors were more about social status than altruism. When Andrew took over the family business after his father's retirement, he quickly expanded into real estate and high-end art investments. He was not merely a trust fund baby. He possessed a keen eye for deals and a magnetic charm that opened boardroom doors. By the time he met Michelle at that Denver convention, he was on the brink of launching a new tech startup that would eventually turn him into a multi-millionaire almost overnight. They met in a corridor lined with promotional banners for keynote speakers. Andrew, freshly off delivering a talk about entrepreneurial risk-taking, was flocked by admirers. Michelle was headed to the restroom when she accidentally caught his eye. Their conversation began with a joke about how crowded the event was, and something in Andrew's demeanor made Michelle stop. For the next 2 hours, they chatted at a coffee table in the lounge, oblivious to the bustling crowd around them. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something close. They shared stories about childhood, life goals, and dreams for the future. When Andrew asked her out to dinner that very evening, Michelle's heart fluttered. In a whirlwind of romance and possibilities, they went from perfect strangers to an inseparable duo. For a long while, it seemed like a dream come true. In the earlier days of marriage, Michelle had never doubted Andrew's devotion. They moved to a chic penthouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side, a place boasting floor-to-ceiling windows and an uninterrupted view of Central Park. The breathtaking vista symbolized the open expanse of their future, a life brimming with promise and success. During their first year together, Andrew worked hard, sometimes late into the evening. Michelle, building her own PR consulting firm, often joined him for business dinners and galas. She would stand proudly by his side, hand in hand, while he closed deals and made vital connections. His social network was staggering: real estate tycoons, venture capitalists, CEOs of global brands. Notably, he struck up a business friendship with Mark Cuban at a charity auction. Andrew's star was on the rise, and everyone wanted to bask in his glow. Yet Michelle noticed subtle changes. The more Andrew's net worth grew, the more she spotted tiny cracks in his persona. His sense of self-importance started to overshadow the gentler qualities that had first drawn her to him. He became more image-conscious, always concerned about being seen at the right events or wearing the right designer suit. Perhaps these were small quirks that came with wealth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. One evening, after a marathon day at work, Michelle found Andrew engrossed in his laptop. His eyes flicked up when she entered the room, but quickly darted back to the screen. She tried to engage him in conversation about their upcoming trip to see her parents in Boston, but Andrew mumbled an indifferent response. Later that night, she discovered that Andrew had cancelled their Boston trip without telling her. Instead, he scheduled a last-minute business retreat in the Hamptons. When confronted, he brushed it aside as just business and insisted she could still go visit her parents alone. Michelle felt a pang of disappointment, but tried to rationalize it. Andrew's success was vital for both of them, wasn't it? It was the first time she sensed real distance between them. He used to move mountains to be at her side. Now, his eyes were always scanning for something else, some better opportunity or bigger deal. Unknown to her, Andrew was also beginning to mix in new circles, ones where marriage vows were considered more ornamental than binding. This was the start of the emotional drift that would push them to the brink. A year before Michelle became pregnant, Andrew decided to expand his horizons beyond real estate and tech startups. He invested in an exclusive yacht club membership in Southampton. The lavishness astounded even him, a place where billionaires moored their floating palaces, where champagne was served like water, and where every day felt like a scene out of The Great Gatsby. Michelle, not fond of deep waters or ostentatious displays of wealth, attended a few yacht parties to support Andrew. She'd wear a summery, modest sundress, while the other women strutted in designer bikinis. Under the blazing sun, she found herself overshadowed by the outlandish extravagance helicopters sometimes landed on the largest yachts just to drop off more bottles of Dom Perignon. It was during one of these gatherings that Michelle first heard the name Harriet Caldwell. She was standing by the refreshment table, trying to navigate casual small talk with a group of people she barely knew. They were all finance moguls or heirs to old money fortunes. Harriet was introduced in passing, her name accompanied by hushed comments. A tall, leggy blonde with a penchant for red lipstick and short dresses, Harriet was rumoured to be quite influential in social circles. Some whispered she was a cunning investor, others claimed she was a social climber who latched onto wealthy men. Michelle had no reason to suspect Harriet of anything at first. She only noticed that Harriet seemed to circle near Andrew at these gatherings, always greeting him with a bright grin, always dressed to kill. Harriet seemed to know precisely how to angle her head, how to lean in during conversation, how to laugh at Andrew's jokes. Michelle brushed it off. Harriet was likely just another socialite. But one evening, as she was tidying the penthouse after Andrew had come home and hopped into the shower, Michelle noticed his phone screen lit up. A single message notification popped. Harriet Caldwell. The text read, "Can't wait to see you again soon." Confused, Michelle felt her heart skip a beat. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe Harriet was part of a bigger investment circle or a networking event. She couldn't ignore the warning glimmer in her mind, though. Andrew had never mentioned Harriet outside of yacht gatherings. Why would Harriet be texting him about a private meetup? The seeds of suspicion were planted deep within Michelle's heart. She desperately wanted to trust her husband. Yet this name Harriet would soon become an omen that haunted her. Amid growing unease, a ray of hope illuminated Michelle's world. She discovered she was pregnant. It happened on a rainy Monday morning. She had been feeling inexplicably tired for weeks, her usual vigor replaced by occasional bouts of nausea. Curious, she took a home pregnancy test. The moment she saw the faint pink line, her pulse soared. She glanced at herself in the bathroom mirror, tears forming. A child, a living symbol of love between her and Andrew. In that instant, her uncertainties receded. She rushed to Andrew's home office, cradling the positive test like it was the most precious secret on earth. Andrew's reaction was unexpectedly subdued. "Yes," he smiled, even lifted her off her feet in a half-spin that made her giggle, but there was a brief flicker in his eyes, something akin to panic. Michelle chose to dismiss it, clinging to the moment of joy. She told herself he was simply overwhelmed by the life-changing news. To her relief, over the next weeks, Andrew showed glimmers of his old self. He accompanied her to the initial doctor's appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital, sat with her during the ultrasound, and even offered to clear some space in his schedule for parenting classes. His supportive front warmed Michelle's heart. Their arguments about cancelled plans and suspicious phone calls faded into the background. Shortly after, they held a small gathering at the penthouse for close friends. Everyone congratulated them, praising them as a power couple who seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and now the promise of a baby. Michelle's eyes shone with happiness as she placed a protective hand on her still flat stomach. That evening, they curled up on the couch together after the guests had left. Andrew gently rested his head on her shoulder. For a fleeting moment, it felt like everything would be all right. Michelle whispered how excited she was to bring a child into the world, to watch them grow, to create a loving family. Andrew nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. But late that night, when Michelle woke up thirsty, she noticed Andrew wasn't in bed. She ventured out to the living room and found him in a tense phone conversation. She caught only a few words. "Yes, Harriet. No, she doesn't suspect anything. We'll meet soon." Michelle retreated before Andrew noticed her presence, her heart pounding. So Harriet was still on his mind, and the storm of doubt began brewing once more. Michelle could no longer ignore the tension roiling beneath their everyday exchanges. Her pregnancy progressed, the joyful swirl of hormones and anticipation mixing with anxiety that clawed at her peace of mind. At 14 weeks, she started showing a small bump, and Andrew's presence in the penthouse became fleeting. He claimed it was an intensely busy period for his startup. Meetings with potential European investors, dinners with business partners from Silicon Valley. Michelle tried to be understanding. It was normal for entrepreneurs to hustle, especially at a critical juncture of a growing venture. Yet, the frequency of Andrew's late-night returns, or sometimes staying out until morning, wore down her patience and trust. One Sunday, she attempted to plan a quiet brunch and an afternoon to shop for baby essentials. Andrew agreed in principle, but woke up restless and left after receiving a phone call. Michelle stood alone in the foyer, keys in hand, tears burning in her eyes. She placed her palm on her belly, silently apologizing to the tiny life for the emotional turmoil swirling in the house. Her PR business also demanded attention. Her clients included a boutique fashion label in Soho and a charity foundation run by the acclaimed journalist Anderson Cooper. While Michelle tried to remain professional, her mind often drifted to Andrew. Could he really be having an affair? Was Harriet more than just a casual acquaintance? In quiet moments, Michelle recalled a time when Andrew would call or text throughout the day, check in about her mood, or share jokes to keep her smiling. Now, a day could pass without a single personal message. Whenever she confronted Andrew about Harriet or the suspicious phone calls, he dismissed them as business negotiations. She wanted to believe him. She wanted so badly to salvage the marriage for the sake of their unborn child, but the nagging sense of betrayal grew stronger. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. During a routine prenatal checkup, Dr. Hoffman at Mount Sinai Hospital reminded her to stay stress-free. Elevated anxiety could complicate the pregnancy, and Michelle, well aware, forced a smile. She decided to speak openly, telling Andrew how vital it was for them to attend counseling or at least have an honest conversation. But Andrew sidestepped the discussion, always too busy, too tired, or too preoccupied with urgent business matters. And still, Harriet's name lingered in the corners of Michelle's mind, like a ghost haunting a once happy home. The turning point arrived on a chilly evening in late autumn. Michelle was tidying Andrew's study, something she did less frequently now, since Andrew had become oddly protective of his workspace. Yet, the desk was cluttered, and the mess annoyed her. Moving aside a stack of glossy brochures for luxury yachts, her eyes landed on a folded letter bearing Harriet Caldwell's signature. Curiosity and dread collided. She considered ignoring it, but the fear that Harriet represented something more than business overcame her. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. It was short, handwritten in elegant cursive. Andrew, thank you for the unforgettable weekend in Monaco. Looking forward to our next adventure. Maybe the Greek Isles? I'll handle everything if you just say the word. Harriet Michelle's mind whirled. Weekend in Monaco. He had told her he was in London meeting with potential investors that weekend. Her breath quickened, tears pricking her eyes. Suddenly, the illusions she'd clung to that Harriet might simply be a business contact shattered. She stood in the study, letter in hand, heart pounding like a drum. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet, a sensation of betrayal that made her want to scream. Memories reeled through her mind. The subtle changes in Andrew's demeanor, the late-night phone calls, Harriet's flirty presence at the yacht club. Andrew walked in moments later, briefcase in hand. He froze upon seeing Michelle's tear-streaked face, the letter clutched in her shaking fingers. For a second, neither spoke. The silence crackled with a rage and hurt so thick it threatened to suffocate them both. Michelle confronted him, demanding to know how long this had been happening. Andrew hesitated, then spouted some half-baked explanation about how Harriet was merely a business acquaintance who enjoyed extravagant trips. He said it was purely work-related travel, an invitation he couldn't refuse. Michelle wasn't buying it. She threw the letter at him, accusing him of betrayal. Andrew, uncharacteristically flustered, responded with anger. He lashed out that Michelle was being irrational, that her pregnancy hormones made her paranoid. The fight escalated until Michelle collapsed onto the nearest chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Andrew stormed out, slamming the penthouse door behind him. In that echo, Michelle felt a chasm open within her. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had chosen to share intimate weekends with another woman. The reality was impossible to deny. Her marriage was in tatters. After that explosive confrontation, Andrew didn't return for 3 days. Michelle's phone calls and texts went unanswered. She contacted his closest friend, Daniel Reyes, someone who had been Andrew's college roommate, and remained a confidant. Daniel claimed ignorance of Andrew's whereabouts, though Michelle sensed he was covering for him. Michelle spent those days wavering between fury, despair, and a surprising sense of resolve. Her baby bump was more prominent now, and she felt fluttering kicks, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for the innocent life growing inside her. Each morning she woke up praying Andrew would walk through the door, apologize, and vow to fix everything. Each night she sank into bed with the same hollow disappointment. When Andrew finally reappeared, he brought with him a barrage of excuses. He'd stayed at a friend's luxury penthouse in Midtown to clear his head. He claimed Harriet had nothing to do with it, but Michelle no longer trusted his words. The heartbreak etched into her face should have moved Andrew to immediate remorse, but instead he remained aloof, even irritated by her tears. That evening, Michelle insisted they talk about boundaries, therapy, and how they'd move forward as co-parents, if nothing else. Andrew nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. Suddenly, a message lit up his screen, Harriet's name again. A wave of nausea hit Michelle. How could he be so brazen, so cold? The conversation escalated into a searing argument that resulted in Andrew storming out once more. Days turned into weeks, and the cycle repeated. He'd return sporadically to the penthouse, always with the same mechanical apologies, but never offering true honesty. He threw money at the situation, insisting Michelle treat herself to high-end maternity wear from brands like Hatch and Seraphine, booking her spa appointments at the Mandarin Oriental. But what she craved was his presence, his support, his love. Friends started noticing Michelle's disheveled appearance and forced smiles. Her mother, visiting from Boston, gently pressed about the tension. But Michelle refused to confide the full truth, fearing the shame and heartbreak that would follow. Sometimes, as she walked by Andrew's empty study, she would pause at the door, remembering better days. The laughter they once shared felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She told herself she would fight for her marriage a little longer for the baby's sake, but somewhere deep within, she suspected the war was already lost. Harriet Caldwell was no longer a whispered name, but a public fixture on Andrew's arm. Gossipy tabloids and social media accounts followed the city's elite and began to feature photos of Andrew and Harriet attending charity galas, exclusive yacht parties, and even fashion events. Michelle would discover these images in the most painful ways, sometimes forwarded by a concerned friend, sometimes appearing unbidden in her newsfeed. In one particularly galling article, Andrew was photographed stepping off a private jet at Teterboro Airport. Harriet exited right behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses and a triumphant smirk. The headlines speculated about Andrew's failing marriage. Michelle was rarely seen in public by then, her pregnancy nearing the final trimester. Michelle confronted Andrew again and again, each time growing more desperate. Could he really parade Harriet around so shamelessly? His responses vacillated between dismissive sneers, accusing Michelle of dramatizing the situation, and half-hearted claims that Harriet was merely a business ally. However, the evidence to the contrary towered like an insurmountable wall. As if the betrayal weren't enough, Harriet began to send thinly veiled taunts to Michelle. Mysterious gifts arrived at the penthouse door, expensive items like Hermes scarves, each attached to a cryptic note signed from Harriet with admiration. Perhaps Harriet intended these gifts as some twisted courtesy, or maybe she reveled in tormenting the pregnant wife. Either way, Michelle felt violated, as though Harriet was staking a claim on Andrew with each new gesture. Andrew's financial empire continued to flourish. He secured a major deal involving a luxury resort chain in the Maldives. To celebrate, Harriet hosted a lavish yacht party in the New York harbor. Michelle heard about it through an acquaintance, who sent her a sympathetic text reading, "I'm so sorry you have to go through this." The pictures from the event showed Andrew and Harriet clinking champagne flutes at sunset, gazing at each other in a way that made Michelle's skin crawl. Michelle found herself standing before the mirror in her bedroom, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. Her face was puffy from crying, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She pressed a hand against her swollen belly, trying to summon any shred of hope. She wanted to believe Andrew would wake from this delusion, realize the damage he was causing, and return to the family he had vowed to protect. But every new photograph, every new rumor, only deepened the chasm between them. The marriage had become a spectacle of heartbreak and betrayal for all to see. By the time Michelle reached her 8th month of pregnancy, she felt emotionally battered. Andrew's fleeting visits were marked by tension, arguments, and a suffocating sense of defeat. Each time he left, she wondered if he would bother returning at all. The financial aspect of their relationship complicated everything. The penthouse, her medical bills at Mount Sinai, her entire business, much of it, was tied to Andrew's financial resources. While she had some savings from her PR firm, it paled in comparison to the towering lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. More importantly, she felt pinned by the looming medical costs of giving birth in a city as expensive as New York. In a moment of vulnerability, she called her mother and finally let out the truth. Her mother's horrified silence spoke volumes, followed by tearful promises to help however she could, but her parents' modest pension and savings hardly seemed enough. Friends advised her to seek a divorce lawyer, but the thought of a lengthy legal battle while heavily pregnant overwhelmed her. In a fit of desperation, Michelle decided to confront Harriet directly. She found Harriet's phone number in Andrew's contacts, mustered the courage, and dialed. Harriet's smug, silky voice answered. The conversation was brief, tense. Michelle demanded Harriet leave Andrew alone, citing the unborn child as a moral reason. Harriet merely laughed, saying Andrew made his own decisions. She suggested Michelle focus on self-care and ended the call abruptly. Shaken to her core, Michelle realized Harriet was far from a passing fling. She represented a calculated threat to Michelle's entire future. The next day, Michelle tried once more to talk to Andrew. She waited in the penthouse until he returned near midnight, reeking of alcohol. She pleaded with him to attend counseling, to consider the impact on their child. Andrew's response was a cold stare, followed by a dismissive wave of his hand. He slurred something about living his life, and that Michelle should stop acting like a clingy woman. Heartbroken, she watched him collapse into the guest bedroom, aware that any apology he might offer in the morning would be meaningless. Inside her own bedroom, Michelle clutched her stomach and wept. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She whispered, "Please, baby, stay strong. I'll protect you, I promise." In the final weeks leading up to her due date, Michelle suffered frequent Braxton Hicks contractions. She anxiously counted down the days until she could hold her baby, hoping, in some corner of her soul, that the arrival might jolt Andrew back to reality. But Andrew had other plans. Harriet convinced him to take a luxury cruise along the coast of the Caribbean. He spun it as a business networking opportunity on a private yacht. Photos soon surfaced online of Andrew feeding Harriet chocolate-dipped strawberries, both smiling in the sun's golden glow. Michelle reached her breaking point one stormy afternoon. She was alone in the penthouse, rummaging through the final items for her hospital bag. Her hands trembled as she realized Andrew had not even left a car service arrangement or any instructions for her to get to the hospital if she went into labor. She had pleaded for him to be around, yet he left for the open sea with Harriet. A swirl of anger, hurt, and betrayal consumed her. She dialed Andrew's phone repeatedly straight to voicemail. She tried to text him. "Andrew, I'm 39 weeks pregnant. If something happens, how am I supposed to reach you?" No reply. Fed up, she decided to draft a letter, leaving it on his desk. She poured out her anguish, her frustration, her love for their unborn child, and her final ultimatum. She wrote, "If you choose Harriet and this lifestyle of betrayal, I cannot continue. I will leave. I will raise our child without you. Make a choice, Andrew." The act of writing the letter felt strangely liberating, but it also cemented her realization that she was truly, desperately alone. A wave of sadness washed over her. She placed a trembling hand over her belly, envisioning the life inside. A baby who had no part in this madness. A baby who deserved better. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, her mind spinning with what life would look like if she left. Could she move back to Boston with her parents? Could she raise the child in a stable environment, free from Andrew's toxicity? The questions tormented her. Yet, fate had its own timeline. The next morning would bring an event that changed everything, forcing Michelle to face the ultimate test of her strength and resolve. Michelle awoke with a jolt, gasping as sharp pain coursed through her abdomen, radiating outward and leaving her momentarily breathless. She lay motionless for a moment, heart pounding furiously, staring at the dimly lit ceiling of the luxurious yet suffocatingly empty penthouse. She glanced at the clock beside her bed. 4:12 am. Another wave of pain surged, stronger and more insistent than the first, stealing away any lingering doubt. She was in labor. Panic immediately overtook her as she fumbled clumsily for her phone, knocking it off the bedside table in the process. Her hands trembled as she retrieved it from the thick carpet. Hastily, she dialed Andrew's number. The call went straight to voicemail, as it had every other time she'd tried to reach him during his lavish yacht getaway with Harriet. Michelle bit her lip hard, her heart twisting in anguish. "Andrew, please," she whispered desperately into the voicemail, her voice breaking. "I'm going into labor. Please, please, come home. I need you." She hung up, tears welling in her eyes, mingling with sweat on her flushed face. Another contraction seized her body, fierce enough to make her gasp aloud and clutch at the sheets. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to get herself to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately. Michelle slowly swung her legs over the edge of the bed, bracing herself as she rose unsteadily. Her body felt impossibly heavy, every movement an effort as she stumbled toward the bedroom door. Her hospital bag was partially packed, Andrew having promised to finalize everything arrangements he had conveniently forgotten amid his own selfish pursuits. Bitter disappointment surged within her, mingled with fury and sorrow. Grabbing the bag hastily, she shuffled toward the elevator. The hallways of the penthouse were silent, painfully empty, the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers only amplifying her loneliness. She stepped into the elevator, gripping the rail tightly as another contraction racked her body. It felt as if her very bones were splintering apart, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, determined to remain calm for the sake of her child. Outside, the city streets were drenched in heavy, relentless rain, wind howling violently between skyscrapers. Michelle shivered, the thin fabric of her dress clinging to her body as icy droplets immediately soaked her through. She held her phone in trembling fingers, frantically attempting to summon a ride through an app, but every driver appeared too far away, 20 agonizing minutes or more. Panic mounted with each passing second. She glanced around desperately for a taxi, but the streets were empty, devoid of life at this inhospitable hour. Her heart thudded in her chest as another contraction hit, brutal enough to send her sprawling onto the soaked pavement. Her phone flew from her grip, landing in a puddle of murky rainwater. Scrambling forward on her hands and knees, she reached out to retrieve it, feeling the sting of humiliation and desperation simultaneously. Cars occasionally sped past, headlights illuminating her briefly, then vanishing without stopping. She shouted hoarsely for help, but her cries were swallowed by the storm, lost in the rush of the rain and wind. The city that had once promised her dreams and luxury now seemed harsh, unforgiving, cruel. Determinedly, she began crawling slowly toward the brighter lights of the intersection ahead, each painful movement driven by an instinctual need to protect her unborn child. Her body trembled violently, fingers scraped raw by the rough pavement. Her vision blurred from tears and exhaustion, but the thought of her baby innocent and unaware of the turmoil that surrounded its imminent arrival propelled her forward. Finally, as hope was beginning to fade, a lone taxi appeared around the corner. Summoning every ounce of strength left within her, Michelle raised one arm, waving frantically. The taxi slowed, the driver noticing the woman hunched and drenched on the sidewalk. The cab pulled to a stop beside her, and the driver immediately sprang from his seat, rushing to her aid. "My God, lady, are you all right?" he shouted over the storm, eyes wide with alarm. "Mount Sinai," Michelle gasped, her voice cracking. "Labor, please, hurry." He helped her gently into the back seat, quickly placing her bag beside her. Michelle sank heavily against the vinyl cushions, relief washing over her briefly as the taxi sped toward the hospital. The contractions intensified, pain radiating fiercely through her entire body, but at least now she wasn't alone. Throughout the journey, she fought waves of agony, her thoughts drifting to Andrew far away on a yacht, blissfully ignorant of her suffering. Anger flickered again, mingling with profound sadness. She clutched her stomach protectively, murmuring softly, "It's okay, baby. We're going to make it." The taxi finally pulled up to the emergency entrance of Mount Sinai. The driver jumped out again, running through the sliding glass doors, shouting for help. Nurses and hospital staff immediately rushed outside, lifting Michelle onto a waiting gurney. She felt a strange sense of detachment as they wheeled her quickly toward the maternity ward, the glaring hospital lights overhead blurring into a white haze. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, offering comforting words as they checked her vital signs and prepared for delivery. But even in the midst of the urgency and pain, Michelle's thoughts remained fixed on Andrew's betrayal and Harriet's smug victory. Her marriage felt shattered beyond repair, yet a newfound strength filled her heart. In the harsh glare of the delivery room, Michelle knew one thing for certain. She would survive this, and she would protect her child at all costs, even if it meant facing the world alone. When Michelle reached Mount Sinai's emergency entrance, the pain was nearly unbearable. Hospital staff rushed to her aid, placing her on a gurney. Nurses and orderlies wheeled her to the labor and delivery wing, her mind swirling with adrenaline and fear. Where was Andrew? Was he even aware she was here? Dr. Hoffman, who had been her OB-GYN, appeared by her side, concern written across her face. "Michelle, you're in active labor. We need to move quickly." Michelle nodded through the haze of pain. Her world narrowed to the harsh fluorescent lights and the relentless contractions racking her body. In between groans, she managed to beg one of the nurses, "Please, try to reach my husband." The nurse left to make some calls, but returned shaking her head. Andrew's phone was still unreachable. Michelle closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The baby was coming faster than anticipated. Dr. Hoffman confirmed that Michelle was fully dilated. Nurses flanked her sides, offering encouragement. The next hour was a blur of screaming, pushing, and heart-pounding urgency. Michelle gasped for air, tears streaming as she willed her body to bring this life into the world. At the height of her exhaustion, She felt a sudden, intense pressure, followed by a flood of relief as the baby emerged. A piercing, newborn cry echoed in the room. Michelle sobbed in gratitude, her arms outstretched, desperate to hold her child. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, her tone bright despite the drama. They placed the fragile infant on Michelle's chest. His tiny lungs wailed, announcing his presence to the world. Overwhelmed, Michelle kissed his forehead, tears pooling in her eyes. She whispered, I'm here, I'm here." A wave of emotions surged through her, love, relief, heartbreak, and anger, all swirling together. Andrew's absence was glaring, yet in this moment the baby filled the space in her heart that had long been hollowed by betrayal. As the medical team cleaned and tended to her, Dr. Hoffman gently touched Michelle's shoulder. "You did great," she said softly. Michelle looked down at her newborn son, a sense of fierce protectiveness sweeping over her. Whatever happened next, she would fight for him with every ounce of strength she had. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Michelle spent the next 2 days at Mount Sinai, recovering from the delivery. She refused to let the hospital staff discharge her too soon. Her blood pressure was a bit high, and she felt safer under professional care. Friends visited, showering her and the baby with warm wishes and gifts. But there was a conspicuous absence. Andrew never appeared. Phone calls, texts, and even voice messages from the hospital staff produced no response. A swirl of rumors suggested Andrew was still on the yacht in the Caribbean, oblivious to the fact that he was now a father. Michelle's frustration and sadness mingled, resulting in a numbing sort of acceptance. In the quiet hours of the night, Michelle gazed down at her sleeping son, whom she had named Gabriel, meaning God is my strength. She chose the name to remind herself and her child that they had a power beyond the man who had walked away. Her mother flew in from Boston, tears of joy and sorrow marking her introduction to her grandson. She stayed by Michelle's side, helping with diaper changes and feeding. They spoke in hushed tones about the future. Michelle confessed she had little desire to remain in the city. Returning to Boston to raise Gabriel near her parents' support seemed increasingly appealing. Yet the logistics weighed heavily on her mind. The penthouse was still under Andrew's name. Could she just leave it all behind? What about her PR firm? And what if Andrew suddenly decided he wanted custody rights? The labyrinth of legal entanglements made her head spin. During her last night at the hospital, Michelle stared out the window at the sparkling lights of Manhattan. She recalled the early days of her marriage, the promise of a life built on mutual admiration and love. Now, that life felt like a mirage, replaced by the living reality of a mistress-filled yacht and an absent father. Still, holding Gabriel's tiny fingers in hers, she felt a surge of resolve. She had gone through labor alone, crawled practically on hands and knees through a storm, and had emerged with a precious new life. She might be broken and bruised, but she was not helpless. She was a mother now, and that gave her the fierce determination to keep going, to protect her child no matter what. On the 4th day, just as Michelle was preparing to leave the hospital, Andrew finally surfaced. She was in her private room, cradling Gabriel, when the door burst open. Andrew stumbled in, looking exhausted, and disheveled shadows under his eyes, and an air of desperation clinging to him. Michelle's initial reaction was a rush of anger. How dare he show up now after missing the birth? But her protective instincts flared, and she merely tightened her hold on Gabriel. Andrew rushed toward the bed, ignoring Michelle's mother's disapproving glare. "I got the message too late," he muttered, voice cracked. The yacht's communication system. Michelle cut him off, her voice trembling with rage. "Communication system? You have a phone. Don't you dare blame technology for leaving me alone." She saw Andrew flinch. Good, she thought. He needed to feel the weight of his failure. Andrew's eyes flickered toward the baby. "He looks healthy." It was a pathetic attempt at fatherly concern, and Michelle scoffed. Her mother stepped in, her voice ice cold. "I think you should leave. Michelle needs rest. This isn't the time for your excuses." Andrew clenched his jaw, but before he could retaliate, Dr. Hoffman entered, flipping through Michelle's chart. She froze briefly upon seeing Andrew, then pressed her lips together. "Michelle is cleared to go home. I'm giving her prescriptions for pain management and postpartum care," Dr. Hoffman stated, handing the documents to Michelle. Michelle glanced at Andrew, reading the mix of guilt and apprehension on his face. She wanted to scream at him, to hurl accusations, but her son stirred in her arms, reminding her that the priority was to stay calm for Gabriel. Andrew shifted his weight. "We can talk in the car." "Let's go home." Michelle let out a short, humorless laugh. "Home? You think that penthouse is a home now?" She felt an undercurrent of quiet strength growing inside her. For too long, she had been overshadowed by Andrew's power and money. But after surviving labor alone, she realized that his wealth didn't shield her from heartbreak or abandonment. As the tension spiked, Michelle's mother carefully took Gabriel from her arms so that Michelle could stand up. "Go wait outside, Andrew," Michelle said, her voice firm. "I'll decide what happens next." She watched him leave, shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked smaller, almost pitiful. The question now was whether she was willing to let him remain part of Gabriel's life and her own. Michelle left the hospital that day, leaning on her mother's support more than on Andrew's token offerings of help. Andrew followed behind them, carrying the hospital bag, but his presence felt like an unwelcome shadow. The car ride back to the penthouse was tense, punctuated only by Gabriel's soft coos. Inside the penthouse, it was as if the walls themselves held memories of betrayal. Harriet's perfume seemed to linger in the corridors, or perhaps it was Michelle's imagination playing cruel tricks. Andrew tried to assist with settling Gabriel into the new nursery, but Michelle waved him off. Instead, she quietly closed the door, shutting him out. That evening, Andrew knocked on the bedroom door, asking for a conversation. Exhausted but resigned, Michelle allowed him in. He began with a barrage of apologies, how he never meant to neglect her, how Harriet was a mistake, how fatherhood had suddenly dawned on him the moment he saw Gabriel. Michelle listened with a blank expression. She thought of the countless nights she'd lain awake, terrified of going into labor alone, of how Harriet's pictures with Andrew had tormented her, of how she'd found his letter from Monaco. "I don't care about your excuses anymore," she said quietly. "I crawled to a taxi in the pouring rain. Andrew, you left me like that." He swallowed hard, tears welling in his eyes for the first time she could remember. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice trembling. "Let me make this right. I'll cut Harriet off completely. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Michelle." She studied him, torn between the love she once had and the damage he'd caused. "I need time," she finally said. "And you need to prove you're actually here for Gabriel, not just on some guilt trip." They talked into the early hours. Andrew offered to pay for counseling, to sign a postnuptial agreement that favored Michelle and the baby. She told him she'd consider it, but only if he showed real effort. No more yacht trips, no more secret phone calls. He promised, tears sliding down his cheeks. As dawn approached, Michelle stepped onto the balcony overlooking Central Park, cradling Gabriel against her chest. She inhaled the crisp morning air, uncertain of the future, but steadfast in her resolve to protect her son and herself. Behind her, Andrew watched silently, a man on the brink of losing everything if he failed to change. For Michelle, a new day was dawning, a day shaped by her own decisions, her own strength, and the unconditional love of a mother for her child. In the weeks that followed, Andrew attempted to reconstruct the tattered threads of their marriage. He blocked Harriet on every communication channel, returned to the penthouse on a regular schedule, and showed genuine effort in caring for Gabriel. The infant's presence seemed to awaken a paternal instinct he had long buried under arrogance and selfish pursuits. Therapy sessions began with a marriage counselor, Dr. Simone Grant, who specialized in high net worth relationship issues. Michelle entered those sessions guarded, refusing to let her guard down after everything she'd endured. But slowly, as Andrew spoke about his pressures, insecurities, and regrets, she found a glimmer of authenticity in him, yet Harriet's ghost remained. Tabloid reports popped up now and then, claiming she was spotted partying in Ibiza, rumored to be with another wealthy businessman. Michelle felt pangs of anger whenever she read these headlines, anger at Andrew for letting Harriet into their lives, anger at herself for not seeing the signs sooner. Despite the rancor, Michelle discovered a new wellspring of resilience. She poured her energy into motherhood, balancing Gabriel's needs with a partial return to her PR business. She found time to take calls with prospective clients, even while rocking Gabriel to sleep. The tasks were exhausting, but also a reminder of her capabilities. Andrew and Michelle were not instantly fixed. Trust, once shattered, is never fully the same. But Andrew's consistent effort to rebuild a routine at home, rising early to feed Gabriel, volunteering to do diaper duty in the middle of the night, spoke louder than any grand apology. Michelle watched him carefully, sometimes letting her heart warm a fraction, sometimes putting up walls to protect herself. They decided to sell the penthouse eventually, opting for a townhouse with more space for a growing child. Moving provided Michelle with a sense of closure, a physical manifestation of leaving behind the haunting memories of Harriet's intrusion. Still, the future remained uncertain. Could Andrew truly shed his former ways and remain faithful? Would Michelle ever fully forgive him? Their story was not a neat fairy tale. It was messy, scarred by betrayal, but also brimming with a newly forged bond. Gabriel, perhaps love, underpinned by genuine change, might prevail. Or perhaps Michelle would finally assert her independence if Andrew reverted to old patterns. For now, mother and child thrived, a testament to Michelle's indomitable spirit. And Andrew, for all his flaws, stood on the precipice of redemption, knowing one misstep could cost him everything he once took for granted. Thank you for accompanying Michelle on her tumultuous journey, a tale of heartbreak, resilience, and the unwavering power of a mother's love. If this story moved you, if you felt anger at Andrew's betrayal and hope at Michelle's fierce determination, then we invite you to take a moment now to support our channel. Please like this video if you found the twists and turns both gripping and inspiring. Share it with friends who appreciate deeply emotional stories that mirror life's hardest truths. And subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that tackle loyalty, romance, and redemption. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you tales that remind us of the human capacity to endure, to transform pain into strength, and to protect what truly matters. So don't forget, hit that like button, share the story, and subscribe today. Thank you for watching.